I'm calling to order this meeting. This is a additional meeting of the Committee of the Whole, the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. The time is 11:25 in the morning. We are in room 500, the council chambers of the Johnny Wilson Building. There's at least one member participating virtually. That would be via the Zoom video broadcast platform. I don't know if the public can still access the meetings through Zoom. I think they can. This meeting is also being broadcast via Council Channel 13 cable television and is or will be available on the council's website, www.dccouncil.gov. This will be a committee of the whole meeting, additional to our regular schedule, followed by a legislative meeting, which will be a regular legislative meeting for the first Tuesday of the month. We begin our committee of the whole meetings by determining a quorum. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Allen. Here. Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker. Here. Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Trahan White. Councilmember Trahan White. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. And I'll note for the record that Councilmember Trahan White has arrived. We have three measures for markup in the committee of the whole, and then a number of measures that are passing through the committee of the whole to the legislative meeting from other committees. If there's no objection, I'm going to move the three bills, which are all designations of names for ceremonial purposes. I'll move them in block, both the prints and the reports. For Bill 25-176, Edna Brown Coleman Way Designation Act of 2023. Bill 25-177, Julius Hobson Senior Way Designation Act of 2023. And Bill 25-178, Dorothy Celeste Boulding Farabee Way Designation Act of 2023. Again, I'm moving all three together and the prints and reports for each together. The first measure is Bill 25-176, the Edna Brown Coleman Way Designation Act of 2023, which would symbolically designate Morse Street Northeast between Holbrook Street and Bladensburg Road Northeast as Edna Brown Coleman Way. The location is in Ward 5. This and the other two are symbolic namings, which are for ceremonial purposes and shall be in addition to and subordinate to any name that is an official name. Edna Brown was born July 1892 in the district. Her father was Sterling A. Brown, a distinguished professor at Howard University. Edna Brown went on to attend Howard University, where she is prominently known as one of the 22 founders of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc., which was created in 1913. It is a not-for-profit Greek-lettered sorority of college-educated women who perform public service and place emphasis on the African-American community. Many of the first meetings of the sorority were held in then Edna Brown in her living room. She was class president at Howard and went on to graduate as valedictorian in the class of 1913. In 1918, Edna Brown and Frank Coleman, one of the founding members of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, were married. Mr. Coleman was a professor at Howard University before joining the United States Army. Tragically, Edna Brown Coleman died during childbirth in 1990. However, long after Edna Brown Coleman's death, the Delta Sigma Theta philanthropy continues through chapters across the United States. The local alumni chapter organized the Delta Housing Corporation. In 1975 and 1979, the Delta Housing Corporation of the District of Columbia constructed the Delta Towers apartments in the Trinidad neighborhood. It was the first housing project for seniors built in the area after the 1968 riots, and at the time was the only building of its kind developed by a group of Black women. The street proposed for designation under this bill runs adjacent to this development. Symbolically designating the street adjacent to Delta Towers will be a fitting tribute not only to Edna Brown Coleman, but to all women trailblazers making a difference in the lives of residents of the District of Columbia. This bill, along with the two following bills, were introduced by Councilmember Parker on February 28, 2023. The Committee of the Whole held a hearing on this bill and the other two bills on July 13th, 2023. And the committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to this bill. The second bill is Bill 25-177, entitled the Julius Hobson Senior Way Designation Act of 2023, which would symbolically designate Queens Chapel Terrace Northeast between Crittenden Street and Michigan Avenue Northeast as Julius Hobson Senior Way. Julius Hobson was born on May 29th, 1922 in Birmingham, Alabama. He attended the Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, but was called to fight in World War II. He later completed his studies and graduated from the Tuskegee Institute, and Mr. Hobson finished his graduate studies in economics at Howard University in the district. He went on to work as a researcher for the Library of Congress and then at the Social Security Administration. Julius Hobson was a leader in the fight for racial equality in the district, especially in the area of education. During the 1960s, he served as the chair of the Washington chapter of the Congress. Let me say that again. During the 1960s, he served as the chair of the Washington chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, where he led protests against local merchants and the bus system who would not hire Black employees, leading to increased opportunities for Black residents. After his daughter was assigned a lower education track than her white peers, Mr. Hobson sued the district's Board of Education in the case of Hobson v. Hansen, where he successfully argued that the district spent more per student on white children versus Black. This led to the ending of the practice of grouping students by ability in 1967. In 1968, Mr. Hobson was elected an at-large member of the Board of Education. In 1971, the DC Statehood Party was founded in order to run Julius Hobson for district's non-voting delegate position in the United States House of Representatives against Democrat Walter Fauntleroy, who Hobson believed had won that nomination without adequately discussing the issues. Mr. Hobson lost to Mr. Fauntleroy, but he did garner enough votes to lead the DC Statehood Party to be recognized as an official party in local elections. In 1971, he was diagnosed with a form of spine cancer and later leukemia. Despite this, in 1974, Julius Hobson successfully ran for one of the at-large seats on the newly created Council of the District of Columbia. Mr. Hobson lost his 6-year battle to cancer in 1977. The third bill is Bill 25-178, the Dorothy Celeste Boulding Farabee Way Designation Act of 2023, which would symbolically designate 2nd Street Northwest between T Street and S Street Northwest as Dorothy Celeste Boulding Farabee Way. The location is in Ward 5. Dorothy Celeste Boulding was born on October 10th, 1898. Having always wanted to be a doctor, she entered medical school at Tufts University School of Medicine, from which she graduated in 1924. Even though she graduated near the top of her class, she was unable to secure an internship in any of the white hospitals in Massachusetts. So she moved to the district for an internship at Freedman's Hospital, which was one of the few hospitals run by African Americans and provided services to the Black community. She completed her internship in 1925 and opened her own practice in an impoverished section of Capitol Hill. Unfortunately, the neighborhood had no ambulatory service, so Dr. Boulding worked with the Friendship House, a charitable segregated medical facility, to open a clinic for African Americans, which became the Southeast Neighborhood House. In 1934, Alpha Kappa Alpha sponsored the Mississippi Health Project to bring primary medical care to the rural Black population of Mississippi. Dr. Farabee was the project's medical director several weeks a year from 1935 to 1942. He was subsequently elected president of Alpha Kappa Alpha. In 1939 and 1949, Dr. Farabee was appointed director of Howard University Medical School's Health Services, a post she held until 1968. She succeeded her friend Mary McLeod Bethune as second president of the National Council of Negro Women from 1949 to 1953, and expanded the organization's efforts to eliminate discrimination against minorities in housing, healthcare, education, and the armed forces. In the 1960s, President John F. Kennedy appointed Dr. Farabee to the Council for Food for Peace. In 1967, Dr. Golding was appointed as one of the 5 U.S. delegates to the World Health Organization's 20th Assembly in Geneva, as well as the DC Commission on the Status of Women, which she chaired from 1971 to 1974. Dr. Farabee died on September 14th, 1980. Symbolically designating the street on which Dr. Farabee's home of many years was located will be a fitting tribute to her groundbreaking work in advocating for equality and excellence in medicine. As I said, all of these bills were introduced by Councilmember Parker on February 28th of this year. The Committee of the Whole held a hearing on them on July 13th, 2023. And the committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to any of these bills. I move the prints and reports with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion? Councilmember Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was proud to introduce the symbolic street namings for Edna Brown Coleman, Julius Hobson Sr., and Dorothy Celeste Bolding Farabee across Ward 5's Trinidad, Queens Chapel, and Bloomingdale neighborhoods to both signify their significant contributions in the fields of education, public service, and medicine, but also to ensure that there is a marker designating their contributions and the history of the significant Black figures with connections to Ward 5 that came way before us. It is my hope that as we advance these street namings, we can take a moment to celebrate the rich histories that you read into the record, Mr. Chairman, but also go further to make sure that the histories that came before all of us and the shoulders of those who we all stand on can be remembered. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I am proud that we are continuing to move forward these street namings and look forward to doing many more. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion? The vote will be on the prints and reports for all 3 bills with leave for staff. All those, roll call. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
The prints and reports for all 3 bills are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, are these measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each? Yeah, there are audio issues, Madam Secretary. But you said once the reports are filed. Madam Budget Director. Madam Budget Director, do the measures fiscal impact statements comply with council requirements?
Yes, they do.
Thank you. No objection. These measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. That completes items for markup in the Committee of the Whole. We'll turn to consideration of measures from other committees. And I'll note that if members have questions, they can ask questions, but not to debate the issues. If you want to debate, then they'll be on non-consent. Objection will consider the first 3, which are resolutions from the Committee on Health in block. PR 25-291, Board of Physical Therapy. Rayan Hogona Wordy Confirmation Resolution of 2023. PR 25-292, Board of Physical Therapy, Nicholas Keeler Confirmation Resolution of 2023. And PR 25-293, Board of Physical Therapy, Hannah Quinones Confirmation Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-291 would appoint Rayan Hagona Wordy as a licensed physical therapist to serve on the Board of Physical Therapy for a term ending April 16th, 2024. She is the CEO of JAW Therapy, which she founded in 2019 to enhance access to physical therapy services east of the Anacostia River through her mobile physical therapy services. She has practiced physical therapy in the district since 2013 in settings including DC Department of Corrections, outpatient settings, and home care. She is a Ward 7 resident. PR 25-292, the Board of Physical Therapy would reappoint Dr. Nicholas Kaler as a licensed physical therapist on the Board of Physical Therapy for a term ending April 16th, 2025. He's the lead therapist to the Medical Surgical Rehabilitation Supervisor at the George Washington Hospital. Dr. Kaler has served on the Board of Physical Therapy since September of 2018. He has practiced physical therapy in the district since 2013, and he is a Ward 5 resident. Finally, PR 25-293 would reappoint Anna Quinones as a licensed physical therapy assistant on the Board of Physical Therapy to serve a term ending April 16, 2024. Ms. Quinones has served on the Board of Physical Therapy since 2019. She is a physical therapist assistant at the MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital. She has practiced as a physical therapy assistant in the district since 2008, and she is a Ward 4 resident. Mr. Chairman, at your request, I'm moving these 3 nominations for the Board of Physical Therapy as a block.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions? Madam General Counsel, are these measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete if we can hear you?
Yes, they are.
Madam Budget Director, do the measures fiscal impact statements comply with council requirements?
Yes, they do.
Without objection, these measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. PR 25-305, also reported out of the Committee on Health. Board of Occupational Therapy, Charles Bond Confirmation Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-305 would reappoint Charles Bond as a recreation therapist on the Board of Occupational Therapy for a term to end April 16, 2025. Mr. Bond is the director of C. Bond Consulting and practices as a recreational therapist at the Edenbridge Pace at Skyland Town Center. Mr. Bond has served on the board since 2010 and has worked as a recreational therapist in the district for over 30 years. He is a Ward 1 resident. We held a hearing on all of these nominations last week, and they were marked up in the committee, but so moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, Mr. Assistant Secretary, someone, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measures fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The next 3 measures are to the Board of Medicine and reported out of the Committee on Health. PR 25-314, Board of Medicine, Danish Jones Confirmation Resolution of 2023. PR 25-315, Board of Medicine, Dr. Carolyn Gorman Confirmation Resolution of 2023. And PR 25-316, Board of Medicine, Dr. Pamaja Pavalari Confirmation Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-314 would appoint Danish Jones as a consumer member of the Board of Medicine for a term to end August 5th, 2025. Ms. Jones is an executive assistant at Stand Together Foundation, a nonprofit philanthropic organization. Bringing her lived experience of chronic illness, which she bravely shared at the hearing, Ms. Jones will work to center patient care in the field of medicine in the district. She is a Ward 7 resident. PR 25-315 would appoint Dr. Carolyn Gorman as a licensed physician on the Board of Medicine for a term ending August 5th, 2025. Dr. Gorman is currently an attending physician in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology with the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group. In this role, Dr. Gorman has worked in labor and delivery, welcoming thousands of healthy babies, and has supervised approximately 80 resident physicians in OBGYN care. Dr. Gorman is a Ward 6 resident, and we did not have any OBGYNs on the Board of Medicine, so we're really excited that Dr. Gorman will be joining. Finally, PR 25-316 would appoint Dr. Padmaja Palavari as a licensed physician on the Board of Medicine for a term to end August 3rd, 2026. Dr. Palavari is a pediatric hospitalist. She's the Associate Chief of Operations for Hospital Medicine Division at Children's National Hospital. She also serves as an associate professor at the Georgetown University School of Medicine. She is a Ward 3 resident. Even though we are moving these 3 appointments today, the Board of Medicine still has a number of vacancies available. So I'm going to take my little 1 minute left here to make my PSA to any members of the health professional community who is interested in serving on any of our 19 professional boards in the health space. We need you to serve. With that, I move these 3 nominations in block.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, are these 3 measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes, they are.
Madam Budget Director, do the measures fiscal impact statements comply with council requirements?
Yes, they do.
Without objection, these measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. Bill 25-73, Ambulatory Surgical Facility Amendment Act of 2023, reported out of the Committee on Health, Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill 25-73, the Ambulatory Surgical Facility Amendment Act of 2023, was introduced by Chairman Mendelson on behalf of the mayor on January 27th, 2023. This bill makes several changes to the district laws pertaining to ambulatory surgical facilities, or ASFs, which are entities that provide outpatient surgical procedures outside of a hospital setting. Specifically, the bill proposes to amend the Healthcare and Community Residence Facility, Hospice, and Healthcare Licensure Act of 1983 by adding certain definitions applicable to ASFs and removing the requirement that DC Health regulations list all procedures that can be performed only at ASFs, if not performed at a hospital or maternity center. DC Health testified that this requirement has held up the promulgation of final regulations for ASFs since 1985, when the Ambulatory Surgical Facility Amendment Act of 1985 was originally passed and required this list. Given the continual advancements in medical treatment and surgical techniques, DC Health has never been able to create a comprehensive list of ASF procedures. The committee print makes several small changes to the bill as introduced, including clarifying that generally non-invasive procedures include medical procedures that do not need to be done in an aseptic surgical field, or in other words, does not need to be done in a room where disease-causing microorganisms have been eliminated. The executive was in favor of this bill as they were the ones who proposed it. And again, like I said, this has been holding up the promulgation of regulations for almost over 37 years. And with that, Mr. Chairman, we move this bill.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. Bill 25-124, Prior Authorization Reform Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 25-124, the Prior Authorization Amendment Act of 2023, was originally introduced in Council Period 24 by Council members Che, Allen, Bonds, Lewis George, and Gray. It was reintroduced in Council Period 25 by Council members Pinto, Allen, Bonds, Robert White, Trayon White, Louis George Gray, and myself, and co-sponsored by Councilmember Parker. The Committee on Health held a public hearing on this bill on May 24th, 2023, where we heard from members of the public and the Department of Insurance, Securities, and Banking. Subsequently, the Department of Healthcare Finance has also provided feedback. This legislation would establish safeguards for district residents enrolled in health benefit plans that use prior authorization requirements to manage or restrict healthcare utilization for any health or mental health service. It does not apply to plans offering only vision or dental coverage. The committee made significant changes to the bill as introduced based on feedback at the hearing and from diverse group of stakeholders. The committee print is complex and addresses many prior authorization issues, so I will try to summarize them as best I can on a high level. The committee print sets strict time limits so that prior authorization for urgent health services must be decided within 24 hours. And for most other health care must be decided within 3 business days if requested through an insurer's electronic portal, or 5 business days if requested by phone, fax, or mail. It requires transparency of prior authorization requirements and of data regarding the insurer's prior use authorization and also rates of denial. It sets qualifications to ensure that physicians reviewing prior authorization requests and appeals have appropriate training and expertise with the services they are reviewing. And it prohibits prior authorization requirements based solely on costs and sets continuity of care requirements for enrollees who switch health insurance plans. As you likely saw, this bill does have a fiscal impact. So the provisions related to Medicaid and DC Healthcare Alliance will be subject to appropriation. Also, the Department of Behavioral Health has not yet submitted their fiscal impact information, so the OCFO will issue an updated FIS prior to the second reading of this legislation. Collectively, the suite of reforms will be a significant step forward in making certain health insurers are not using prior authorization to prevent use of needed healthcare services solely based on those costs, while also ensuring and allowing insurers to monitor utilization so that care is delivered in a medically appropriate manner. Residents will have more information about the requirements, and insurers will have to respond to requests for care in an expedited fashion. With that, Mr. Chairman, I move this legislation.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does this bill have a fiscal impact?
Yes, it does. As the council member mentioned, the FIS will be updated prior to second reading, but as of now, the cost is 9.66 million in FY24 and 25.4 million over the financial plan. And remember, because this is Medicaid, it is a 30-70 split between the local and the federal portion of the cost.
Thank you. And I apologize to Councilmember, you did say some of that. Let's see, we did the clearances. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The next bill is Bill 25-312, Health Professional Licensing Boards Residency Requirement Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 25-312, the Health Professional Licensing Board Residency Requirement Amendment Act of 2023 was introduced by Councilmember Parker and myself on June 2nd, 2023. The bill is intended to address the high number of vacancies within the health professional licensing boards, which are responsible for the licensing and conducting disciplinary procedures for district health workforce. Currently, the DC Code requires that all members of the health professional licensing boards administered by DC Health be district residents. This requirement, while laudable in spirit, has created challenges for the district to fill all board seats, particularly for boards where a significant percentage of health professionals under that board's jurisdiction do not live in the district. Among the 19 health professional licensing boards, none oversee professions where more than 40% of licensed professionals are district residents. With one board, there are only 8% of their health professionals that are district residents, and on average, only 19% of health professionals licensed under these boards are district residents. This has consistently led to high vacancy rates for many of our boards. For example, even after this committee just confirmed 3 new members to the Board of Medicine. The board will still have 5 out of 15, or 1/3 of its seats being vacant. Similarly, the Board of Nursing has 11 seats with 7 vacancies. The Board of Psychology has 5 seats with 2 vacancies. It is even more difficult for boards who have a small number of professionals licensed in the district. For example, of the 145 licensed podiatrists in the district, only 8%, that is 11 individuals, live in the District of Columbia. Of the 232 optometrists licensed in the district, only 14%, or 41 individuals, live in the district. And of the 187 marriage and family therapists, only 21%, or 39 individuals, live in the district. Pulling for such a small pool of individuals is challenging and has contributed to these high levels of vacancy rates. Board vacancies means that less perspectives are considered for licensing decisions, and high vacancies can slow down the issuance of health professional licenses and determinations based on disciplinary investigations and hearings. To address this problem, this bill would change the residency requirement to allow only that up to 50% of the seats can be held by health professional members of the licensing boards who are not district residents. This bill would not change the requirement that all consumer members, as well as the chairperson of the board, be district residents. And to ensure that non-district residents serving on boards are still committed to the district, the bill adds several additional eligibility criteria. First, in addition to being licensed in the district and engaged in the practice of health occupation for at least 3 years preceding appointment, non-district residents must continue to actively practice in the health occupation covered by the board.
Without objection.
Yeah, okay. Non-district resident members must continue to actively practice the health occupation covered by the board in the district for the entire time that they are members of the board. We've had some issues where some folks, some board members have retired from practice. This would address that. Non-resident members must have physical presence in the district where they practice at least 20 hours a week. So that is to ensure that non-resident members must demonstrate that their practice is not primarily telehealth. And finally, the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments must verify on an annual basis that board members meet the requirements under this legislation. We believe that the committee print strikes the right balance of increasing the district's ability to recruit qualified health professionals serving district residents for our health professional licensing boards, while also ensuring that boards are committed to protecting and enhancing the health and well-being of district residents. With that, Mr. Chairman, I move this legislation available for any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members?
Mr. Chairman,
Councilmember Parker.
this is less a question and more of a note that I originally did co-introduce the legislation, and after that point received feedback from constituents, and in the committee hearing made note that I was not going to be able to support the legislation. I did vote present. And part of my concern was that we need to do more to attract district residents to these board positions. I would give you the example of the one board that has currently 1 member. As Council Member Henderson mentioned, it stands to reason that then many other members could potentially be non-district residents on that board. While I do appreciate the balance that was struck by the committee and I think is represented in the committee markup, I am not able to support the legislation, although I originally co-introduced it. Thank you.
Do want to remind members that only questions are allowed during committee of the whole. Debate is for the legislative meeting. Are there further questions from members?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question to myself and then respond?
Or you can ask a question to me, which you'll answer.
Okay. Councilmember Henderson, does this bill require that MOTA, the mayor's office, or DC Health appoint non-district residents to these seats? Councilmember Henderson responding, no, Councilmember, no, it does not. It just gives them the authority when they're having difficulty recruiting people to some of these professions. We did have an oversight hearing on Board of Professional Counseling, where we do have 1 member. When we check the minutes, we have 1 member of the board who has made a motion, seconded a motion, and voted for her own motion. We asked how that was legally available, but quorum is established based on who has been appointed to the board. And so I've met with the head of the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments this summer. to express that we needed more focus on these positions because again, this is licensing, but also discipline. So when we have consumers, residents who are bringing issues about health professional workforce who are practicing in the district, we want to make sure that it is not 3 people or less than that who are determining whether or not someone gets to keep their license or whatever the disciplinary proceedings are necessary.
For questions, Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. To Councilmember Henderson, I wonder if thought has been given to reducing the required membership for these very important boards.
Yes, that has come up. We anticipate, we are awaiting legislation from the executive. It's called the Health Occupation Revision Act. Yes, the HORA, as it is more commonly referred to. We expect for that, I know. I didn't make up the acronym. I was just told that's how they pronounce it. Nonetheless, we are expecting that to be transmitted to the council any day now. My understanding is that there might just be one last person on the executive who needs to review this before it's sent to us. But there are some, I believe there will be some suggestions about reducing the membership on some of these boards. But for some of them, optometry, dentistry, podiatry, we're already at 5 people. But with podiatry, if I have only 11 people who are eligible to serve on this board and it's 5 seats, I could call through that list 3 or 4 times, but it's a voluntary position. I have no leverage to say that someone must serve in this manner.
And Chairman, to Councilmember Henderson, has there been discussion with the executive about the possibility of making these paid board positions, given that this is a licensing body, which can affect the health and the well-being of the citizenry in the District of Columbia?
In ways. So I believe, and I'm just going to say it, I'm not saying this to be shady, but there is legislation that is currently pending before the council on a review to look at boards and commissions and who is currently receiving payment and to look at those who aren't receiving payment and determine whether or not those should be paid. I think the question is, what is the right rate? For these particular licensing boards, it is a hefty amount of work. I've definitely seen the agenda, especially for some of the larger ones, Board of Nursing, Board of Medicine. When it comes up for renewals, or you have new classes who are entering in, it could be up to, 10 hours each week of work to do your job and do it well.
Yes, Councilmember Bonds, you have a third question?
No, no, and I know my statement has to wait till some later point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson, did you say that there's a bill pending to review compensation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it has already received a hearing. It is just pending. It's pending.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. It's actually, it's Bill 25-33. Thank you for pointing that out. There are no further questions. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. There's no objection. We'll consider the next, let me see, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 resolutions in block. They all concern appointments to the to the Commission on Human Rights. They were reported out of the Committee on Public Works and Operations, chaired by Councilmember Nadeau. PR 25-235, Commission on Human Rights, Terry Janine Quinn, confirmation resolution of 2023. PR 25-236, Commission on Human Rights, Motoko Azawa, confirmation resolution of 2023. PR 25-237, Commission on Human Rights, Karen Mulhauser, Confirmation Resolution of 2023. PR 25-238, Commission on Human Rights, Henry Floyd Jr., Confirmation Resolution of 2023. PR 25-239, Commission on Human Rights, and Antonesia Wiley, Confirmation Resolution of 2023. And PR 25-240, Commission on Human Rights, Colin Betamo, Confirmation Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-235 appoints Terry Janine Quinn to the Commission on Human Rights. She is a practicing attorney in the District of Columbia and currently has her own firm, the Law Offices of Terry Janine Quinn, that represents small businesses in regulatory matters. Ms. Quinn spent 5 years as an associate at White and Case LLP, where she focused on energy, infrastructure, and project financed law. Ms. Quinn has a long list of volunteering and currently serves as the president for the Bloomingdale Civic Association, a role she has held since 2010. She's also been honored as a Woman of Excellence by the District of Columbia Commission for Women and by the DC Federation of Civic Associations. PR 25-236 reappoints Motoko Ozawa to the Commission on Human Rights. She was first appointed to the commission in 2012 and became the chair in 2020. Commissioner Ozawa is an expert on the many dimensions of sustainable development, including the role of governments and businesses in respecting and protecting human rights. She also advises the United Nations, various government bodies, and civil society on these topics. PR 25-237 reappoints Karen Mulhauser to the commission. She has served on the commission since 2017. She's currently the president of Mulhauser and Associates, where she has provided consulting services to nonprofit organizations, grant makers, and candidates since 1988. She brings a wealth of experience in women's issues, human rights, civil rights, and international security advocacy. From 1975 to 1981, Ms. Mulhauser was the executive director of the National Abortion Rights Action League. She's also a member of the Antioch College Alumni Board and chairs the advisory council of the Women's Information Network. PR 25-238 appoints Henry E. Floyd Jr. to the Commission on Human Rights. He's the general counsel for the Daniel Initiative, a government relations and strategic communications firm that intentionally services traditionally underrepresented and underserved populations to promote positive social change. As a seasoned litigator, Mr. Floyd has advocated for injured workers and victims of egregious medical malpractice incidents, and he's secured substantial settlements for his clients and their families. He's an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, raising thousands of dollars for scholarships and cultivating employment opportunities for minority law students, and fights to provide access to justice for disenfranchised communities. PR 25-239 appoints Antonesia Tony Wiley to the commission. She's the director of advocacy at the National Urban League Washington Bureau, where she works with various organizational partners and community stakeholders to drive the Urban League's policy platform in Congress and at the grassroots level. Ms. Wiley has also served on boards for the University of Alabama, Birmingham Minority Health Disparities Research Center and the American Cancer Society. She was recognized by the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute during their 50th anniversary civil rights movement commemorative activities. Finally, PR 25-240 appoints Colin Ratamel to the Commission on Human Rights. They are an experienced trial and appellate attorney with a background of adjudicating and litigating complex appeals. They currently serve as a judicial law clerk on the United States Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. They also serve as assistant public defender for the Maryland Office of the Public Defender, DC Office of State Superintendent of Education, DC Office of Attorney General, and the Metropolitan Police Department. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I move these 6 measures in block to be placed on the consent agenda for the legislative meeting to follow.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, are these measures legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes, they are.
Madam Budget Director, do the measures, physical impact statements comply with council requirements?
Yes, they do.
Without objection, these measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The next measure is Bill 25-42, Grounds for Divorce, Legal Separation, and Annulment Amendment Act of 2023. This was reported out of the Committee on Judiciary and Public Safety, chaired by Councilmember Brooke Pinto, who is not here for the Committee of the Whole meeting. And I believe Councilmember Nadeau, you're going to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This legislation is a victory for domestic violence survivors and will change the lives of so many residents. I'm grateful to my colleague, Councilmember Pinto, for moving it through her committee, and I'm happy to be able to move it on her behalf today. This legislation importantly modernizes the district's divorce and domestic relations laws in 3 ways. First, it eliminates mandatory waiting periods for divorce and legal separations in the district. Waiting periods are outdated and problematic, and they are legally and practically confusing. Removing them provides clarity and consistency for court operations, expedites proceedings, and reduces litigation costs. Eliminating waiting periods is also important for survivors of domestic violence, so they do not have to remain in abusive and dangerous living situations while trying to divorce or legally separate. Second, the bill adds the history of emotional, physical, or financial abuse by one spouse against the other as a consideration for courts to look at when determining the distribution of property and alimony. This addition codifies current judicial practice and expands considerations of domestic violence. Survivors will know the considerations of domestic violence in all its complexity and history is an explicit, relevant factor in alimony and marital property allocation proceedings. Third, this bill authorized courts to award exclusive use of a family home to a party as relief during ongoing divorce, legal separation, termination of domestic partnership, or annulment proceedings. Survivors of intimate partner and domestic violence should not have to choose between giving up their homes during legal proceedings or remaining in a dangerous living situation. The bill's provisions explicitly authorize judges to award exclusive use of the family home or dwelling as temporary relief will help to ensure that they do not have to make that choice. In short, this bill beneficially modernizes domestic relations law in the district and will be important for survivors of intimate partner and domestic violence. Grappling with abuse is hard enough and the recovery is long. District law should not be the thing holding people back from leaving abusive relationships. To say the least, I'm very proud of this legislation and happy to move it today. Mr. Chairman, I ask that this bill 25-42 be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Are there questions regarding this bill? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there any fiscal impact to this?
There is no fiscal impact.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. Finally, we have PR 25-279, Department of Energy and Environment, Richard Jackson, confirmation resolution of 2023. In order for us to consider this, there has to be a waiver of Committee of the Whole Rule 403B, which is the report was filed timely for the Rule 403B, but not timely for a right to this agenda. I think I'll treat this as unanimous consent. There's no objection. We will consider the Committee of the Whole Rule 403B waived. Is there any objection? It's so ordered. We have the resolution before us. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was so excited to be able to move that waiver. You took care of that so well. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
The Department of Energy and Environment, Richard Jackson Confirmation Resolution of 2023 was introduced by Chairman Mendelson at the request of the mayor on June 14th, 2023. As introduced, this measure would confirm Acting Director Richard Jackson as the permanent director of the Department of Energy and Environment. On September 21, 2023, the Committee on Transportation and the Environment held a public hearing on PR 25-279, and on September 27, 2023, the committee approved the bill at markup. Acting Director Jackson joined the agency in 2008 as a hazardous waste inspector. Prior to being named as acting director, he served as senior deputy director, the second in command of the agency. Before joining DOEE, Mr. Jackson served in the U.S. Navy for 21 years as a nuclear submariner. In this role, he operated nuclear reactors, power generation and propulsion systems, and weapons systems. Mr. Jackson holds a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh. At the confirmation hearing, the committee heard universal support from all public witnesses who testified in person or submitted written testimony for the record. In fact, I asked public witnesses if they had any concerns about Acting Director Jackson's nomination, and I couldn't get a single witness to speak up. When speaking in support, public witnesses emphasized Acting Director Jackson's experience with and understanding of many aspects of DOE's work, especially his leadership of the Anacostia River Sediments Cleanup Project. Public witnesses also praised Acting Director Jackson's demonstrated willingness to engage personally and closely with all stakeholders. The committee sent Acting Director Jackson several of our standard questions about conflicts of interest, outstanding taxes, and the like, and he confirmed that he has no conflicts or other financial entanglements that concern the committee. However, I will note the acting director currently lives in Columbia, Maryland, and as noted in the committee print, district law requires that all agency directors establish residency in the district within 180 days after appointment. During the hearing and testifying under oath, Acting Director Jackson stated that he is on track to move into the district by the end of calendar year 2023. And I emphasize the importance of not missing that 180-day deadline. The committee will continue to follow up with DOE and Acting Director Jackson to ensure, but I am confident in Acting Director Jackson's intent to comply with our residency law. I believe that Mr. Jackson possesses the background necessary to serve as the Director of the Department of Energy and Environment. Mr. Jackson has 15 years of experience working at DOE in various staff level and leadership capacities. And since I took over this committee earlier this year, Mr. Jackson has been really good with communications, collaborative in spirit, and responsive. So I'm happy to answer any questions about Acting Director Jackson's nomination. This will allow DOE to have a permanent director for the first time in more than 10 months. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I request this be placed on the consent agenda for the legislative meeting to follow.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Assistant Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. That concludes the items for consideration on our agenda. There's no other business. We will take about 5 minutes and I will be timed before we start the legislative meeting in this same room. Time is now 12:17 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. I'm calling to order this meeting. This is a regular meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. It's the 14th legislative meeting of the council, this council period. Today is Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. The time is 12:40 in the afternoon. This meeting is being held in the council chambers, room 500 of the Johnny Wilson Building. There's at least one member participating virtually, I think. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence. If members in the chamber, actually everyone in the chamber, would be respectful, a moment of silence. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen,
Here?
Councilmember Bonds,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman,
Present.
Councilmember Gray,
Here.
Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George. Here. Councilmember McDuffie,
Here.
Chairman Mendelson,
Present.
Councilmember Nadeau. Here. Councilmember Parker,
Here.
Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. First order of business, we have the filing of committee reports and special reports. That is the Secretary's report of committee filings. I'll recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Councilmember Kenya McDuffie.
And I will move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report.
It's been a motion to waive the reading of the report. Is there discussion? On the motion to waive the reading, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the Secretary's report of introductions. I'll again recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie.
I move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report of introductions.
It's been a motion to waive the reading. Is there discussion? By voice vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the consent agenda, and the consent agenda comprises many pages of the agenda. Up through half of page 10. Are there any changes to the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Parker,
I move that we remove the Bill 25-312 Health Professional Licensing Board's Residency Requirement Amendment Act of 2023 off of the consent agenda.
you said Bill 25-312.
That is correct.
Any other changes to the consent agenda? I'm removing from the consent agenda on page 4, at the top of the page, number 1, Bill 25-55, Pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees. Not hearing any other changes, let me summarize. We have the consent agenda before us with 2 items removed. Bill 25-55 and Bill 25-312. That's the first and last items on page 4 of the agenda. Hearing no further changes to the consent agenda, we'll have a roll call vote on the consent agenda. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
The consent agenda is approved unanimously. Turning to page 4, Bill 25-55, Pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees Act of 2023. I removed this from consent. The report has not been filed. I move to table this to the next legislative meeting There's no objection. It will be deemed I said tabled. I meant postponed. There's no objection. It will be deemed postponed. It is postponed to the next legislative meeting. At the bottom of the page, Bill 25-312, Health Professional Licensing Board's Residency Requirement Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Henderson,
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
discussion. We have the bill before us. Roll call vote. I know, first reading. Now, roll call vote, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
No.
Councilmember Parker votes no. Councilmember Pinto is absent, and Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 11 yeses, 1 no, and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill is approved first reading. We will turn to the non-consent agenda, beginning on page 10. The first item is final reading on School Student Vaccination Amendment Act of 2023, Bill 25-278. The committee report has not been filed. I move to postpone this to the next legislative meeting. If there's no objection, it will be postponed to the next legislative meeting. Hearing no objection, so ordered. The next measure is final reading and vote on temporary legislation, Bill 25-451, River East at Grandview Condominium Assistance Tax Exemption Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. The emergency version of this was approved on September 19th. This legislation is a continuation of emergency and temporary legislation that was adopted a year ago. What this bill is about is to provide an exemption from the real property tax for the residents to condominium owners at River East at Grandview Condominium, which is located on Talbot Street Southeast in historic Anacostia District. This is a property where there has been significant damage due to shifting of the ground. And the district has been attempting to provide relief, and this legislation is part of that. The notice for the emergency and temporary in September said income tax, but the legislation is about real property tax. And so I just want to make that clear. If there's no further discussion. Councilmember Robert White, discussion.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you for moving this, and just for perspective for the public. We're talking about here many people and families who bought condos several years ago, who really started to live out their dreams of home ownership. I remember buying my first home, and the foundation that it created for me and my family that we still benefit from today. These are folks who've been in limbo for 2 years, dealing with lawsuits, managing credit impacts, figuring out how to cover their mortgages and rents. There just have been a lot of unknowns. And while the city is not, in my view, liable for what happened, these residents and homeowners aren't either. Now they face an unknown future, and whether or not they'll be homeowners again in the future. The market is different. Homes cost more. Mortgage rates are higher. And so these are folks who really are missing out on an opportunity that they thought was settled after a lot of work to get to where they are. I appreciate the mayor and the administration stepping up over the past 2 years to assist with rent. And I look forward to working with the mayor and with council colleagues to figure out a sustainable plan, a permanent plan to assist these families. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Trahan White.
I want to thank you, Chairman, for your
assistance with these owners. Also, I want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Robert White. And I feel like we as a government, even though we say that we don't have a responsibility, we do have a role. We haven't defined what that role is, but there has been several instances, as talked about earlier, when the government says it's okay to go forward after an inspection, and then sometime later, the building is not just shifting, and that has not just shifted, but it's shifting. Studies showed just a few months ago that the land and the properties have shifted yet again. And so this not only poses a threat for those homeowners who had to move out, but those who sit behind those houses on Morris Road, who those houses can potentially fall on. We've seen this happen in Florida before. And so we have to figure out, and I've been meeting with Mayor Bowser. She has done a number of things with the residents, but I believe that we can do more to make these residents whole. Because the reality is that their mortgage company has not been as friendly as the district, and it's hard for them to get another mortgage, having a mortgage pending. And so we've essentially allowed for them to go somewhere for 6 months. We've had this previous measure here at the council that pretty much took away their role in paying their taxes. But we have to figure out a way to do more to ensure that we can help these residents transition. And all of these owners are mostly first-time homeowners and Black people in the district. And that's been a priority, as I've heard through press conferences from the mayor, but we got to put our money where our mouth is. And so I've been in several different conversations, meetings, hearings, Zooms, and we have a shift in leadership. I hope that we can bring this back to the table and figure out how to help these residents land. I want to thank you, Chairman, for your leadership. Look forward to supporting other measures similar to this to help relieve some of the stress and pressures for these residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Further, Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this measure. And my hope, of course, as has been for the last 2.5 years, that we would, as a city, take the unprecedented move to remove these families from their first mortgage. I think that's the best solution for them, because as my colleague Trayon White pointed out, they cannot very well start a new chapter of home ownership until they get from under that burden. Originally, that was one of the provisions that was requested for these families. And I'm not sure how it became derailed or is not being considered now, but I think it's the direction we have to go in. These are our citizens, our people, individuals that we said we would make good your opportunity to purchase in the District of Columbia. So I'm very hopeful that we will be able to find a way to relieve them of that burden so they can move forward and become homeowners anew. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. There's no further discussion. We have the bill before us. Secretary, are we doing a roll call? We're all in person, but
No, we're not.
we'll have a roll call on this.
Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau. Yes. Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes, and Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill is approved unanimously. Turn now to emergency legislation. The first item is CJCC Data Collection Technical Correction Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Pinto is the sponsor of this. And she is not here. If there's no objection, we will, I think the proper term is table this till he moves it. So we will turn to item 2, medical cannabis patient access clarification emergency declaration resolution of 2023, PR 25-457. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The district currently permits non-district resident patients that are not enrolled in another jurisdiction's medical cannabis program to participate in its medical cannabis program by registering as a non-resident cardholder. Patients from all 50 states are registered with the district as non-resident cardholders as of July 31st, 2023. International patient visitors from 46 countries have registered as non-resident cardholders. There is an immediate need to amend the definition of non-resident cardholder to clarify that the term non-district resident in the definition includes international patients who are visiting the district, and to amend the definition of qualifying patient to include non-resident cardholders. The emergency legislation also defines the term another jurisdiction to clarify that this term is not just limited to the 50 states of the United States, but means any state, commonwealth, or territory of the United States. And finally, to eliminate barriers to access for qualifying patients in the medical cannabis program, the emergency legislation permits the Alcoholic Beverage and Cannabis Board through rulemaking to make patient and patient and caregiver registrations available at no cost. The medical cannabis program changes in the proposed emergency, and those changes enacted in prior emergencies will be considered by the Committee on Business and Economic Development and Permanent Legislation this fall. With that, I move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on PR 25-457. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-514. Mr. McDuffie,
So move.
discussion. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote on the bill. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. Next measure is PR 25-467, 11th Street Bridge Project DOEE Permit Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The 11th Street Bridge project is seeking final permit approvals from the Department of Energy and the Environment. As you know, the park would use pilings from the old 11th Street Bridge to create a park that spans the Anacostia River from Ward 6 to Ward 8. In determining whether to issue the needed permit, DOEE considers whether the basic purpose of the project can be reasonably accomplished using one or more other land-based sites in the same general area. Well, by its nature, the bridge park cannot strictly comply with those regulations because some of the amenities planned for the project could technically be located on a land-based alternative site. However, the Bridge Park project is designed to uniquely activate the Anacostia River over the water itself, connecting the neighborhoods on either side of the river with a broad array of community activities and engagement. Proposing land-based alternatives is not feasible for a park whose essence is in and over the water. Therefore, last year, the council approved the 11th Street Bridge Project Emergency and Temporary Acts of 2022 to exempt this project from the requirement to present a land-based alternative. This would allow DOEE to issue permits for the project. The Committee on Transportation and the Environment has learned that DOEE has not yet issued the necessary permits using the authority the council granted last year. The 2022 Temporary Act is set to expire on October 6th, 2023. This second round of emergency and temporary legislation is identical to the legislation the council approved last year and is necessary so that DOEE will retain authority to finally issue the necessary permits. With that, I move the declaration, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll? The vote is on PR 25-467.
Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes,
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-529. Councilmember Allen,
So moved, Mr. Chair.
discussion. By voice vote, all of those in favor of Bill 25-529 say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-464, UC Nursing Education Enhancement Program Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. This is a new round of emergency and temporary legislation that would continue to authorize stipends for nursing students at the University of the District of Columbia Workforce Development and Lifelong Learning Division. The program was established in fiscal year 2022 in the 2022 year budget to provide education benefits for district residents in various nursing and healthcare programs at UDC, as well as at community training providers. The program provides tuition assistance for students in UDC's four-year program and at the UDC Community College. I move the declaration. Is there discussion? Councilmember Bonds.
thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask a little bit about those who go through the program. Is there an expectation that they would work in the healthcare arena in the District of Columbia, or are we just adding to those who have these credentials and they can go anywhere in the country or out of the country for that matter and use these credentials?
As far as I know, there isn't that requirement. This is a continuation of emergency and temporary that was adopted previously.
I understand, but I wanted to get some clarity as to our expectations because we are putting taxpayer dollars into the pot. So just wanted to, so we don't really know what to expect.
I don't
other
know
than-
offhand.
Okay.
I only have the legislation in front of me, which a second here.
So is
It
now,
amends the existing DC Nurse Education Enhancement Program Amendment Act of 2021 to provide that qualified students can receive a monthly stipend for living expenses. So it's amending existing law. And I didn't know to look at that law before this meeting.
all right. So if we wanted to amend the emergency, you would accept a oral amendment? Could you?
No, I
No.
would not, because I would
Okay.
need to look. Councilmember Bonds, I wish this had come up at the breakfast and we would have had time to look. I have not looked at the underlying statute. What I put forward was a continuation of what the council had previously adopted. And it's amending existing law. I've not looked at that organic act. And it's amending that existing law consistent with the way we acted a year ago.
All right. And so therefore, at a point later, the emergency and temporary could be amended.
The temporary, both could be amended. We could do another emergency at the next meeting.
All right.
We could amend the temporary on final reading.
All right, that would satisfy my concerns. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Further on the measure. We'll have a roll call vote on PR 25-464. Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George. Yes. Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau. Yes. Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes,
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-525, so moved. Is there discussion? All those in favor of the bill, say aye. Aye.
aye.
Are there any no votes? The ayes have it unanimously. The next measure is parity in workers' compensation recovery emergency declaration resolution of 2023. This legislation actually continues emergency and temporary legislation that was previously adopted by the council. This legislation would amend the District of Columbia Workers' Compensation Act of 1979 to provide that the payment or award of compensation under the workers' compensation law of any other state would not bar a claim for compensation under the district workers' compensation law for the same injury or death, provided that any award under the district workers' compensation law is reduced by the amount of compensation received or awarded under the workers' compensation law of the other state. The council first addressed this, I believe it was in May of 2023. And the permit legislation is now pending in the council. And I move the declaration. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on PR 25-455. Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George. Yes. Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau. Yes. Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes,
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes, and Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and one absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-511, so moved. Is there discussion? By a voice vote, all those in favor say aye. You know, I didn't say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? I don't hear any opposed. The bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-463, clarification of UDC PR Harris exclusive use repeal emergency declaration resolution of 2023. I circulated this notice last week. In 2010, the council gave the University of the District of Columbia the exclusive use of the closed Patricia R. Harris Educational Center School which is located at 4600 Livingston Road Southeast. In 2020, the council approved legislation which repealed UDC's exclusive use of PR Harris and transferred it to the District of Columbia to reduce the financial burden of maintaining the building, which needed extensive modernization. In addition, so that the building could be used by, I believe it's 2 charter schools. When the temporary amendment expired and temporary legislation has expired in April of 2021, the district no longer retained the exclusive right to PR Harris. The district has negotiated a new lease with the tenants of PR Harris. It was thought at the time that no other legislative action was necessary. Recently, I was informed that legislation is still needed to ensure the transfer of the exclusive use of PR Harris from UDC to the District of Columbia. So this is a retroactive repeal of UDC's exclusive use of PR Harris, or a retroactive application of the legislation that we allowed to expire in 2021. Please note that the final version of the bill, what we are voting on, also includes another provision that extends DEMPED's grant-making authority into fiscal year 2024 to deal with the $2 million that the district budgeted in the non-departmental account for the Douglas Community Land Trust. I think I said I moved the declaration. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on the declaration.
Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. The underlying bill is Bill 25-522. So moved. Is there discussion? By a voice vote, all those in favor of the bill say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-440. Karen House TOPA Exemption Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karen House is a 40-unit apartment building providing affordable housing to seniors on the former Walter Reed campus in Ward 4. The building was developed and is managed by SUM Inc., which also provides on-site supportive services to residents. The apartments began leasing earlier last year. Some developed Karen House using low-income housing tax credits and other public financing tools. Like many other Walter Reed developments, the land here is currently owned by the district, ground lease to the Walter Reed master developer, and sub-ground lease to SUM. Under the real estate contracts, the districts will transfer the fee interest in the land to SUM after the apartments are 50% occupied. That threshold was crossed in April. The transfer is expected to trigger the residents' rights under TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity Purchase Act of 1980. In at least one similar situation from the past, a for-profit developer took advantage of this opportunity to buy the tenants' rights and take over an affordable housing building. To prevent such an abuse from happening again and to ensure a smooth real estate closing, SUM has requested that the transfer of Karen House be exempted. I think SUM's request is reasonable, and this legislation is very similar to a bill unanimously approved in 2018 in connection with some affordable housing at Anna Cooper House, which is also managed by SUM. Mr. Chairman, if there's no objection, I would like to move the resolution with a minor amendment that corrects a factual error in the recital appearing in section 2D. This amendment was circulated last night by email from Will Singer on my staff at 7:34 p.m.
Councilmember Louis George. Forgive me, I was not paying complete attention, but that's because I have complete confidence in you and I have some knowledge what you're doing. You moved the resolution and now you've moved an amendment?
Yes,
Okay. And the amendment was circulated, I believe, late yesterday?
yes, at
So
7.
all members have it?
Yes.
If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted.
Thank you. I moved the
I'm
resolution.
waiting to hear the objection. I'm
Oh.
not hearing any. Not hearing any objection, the amendment is accepted. We have the declaration before us as amended. Is there discussion? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll? This is a roll call vote on PR 25-440.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and one absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill before us, Bill 25-493. Councilmember Louis George,
So moved.
discussion. All those in favor of the bill say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Bills approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-461, Sexual Harassment Investigation Review Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. Since August, the Office of the Inspector General has transmitted to Council 2 letters providing updates on its progress to procure independent counsel for a review of the sexual harassment complaints against the former Deputy Mayor, Chief of Staff, John Falchecchio. We knew the process wouldn't be easy and we anticipated a few bumps in the road. OIG's most recent update to the council showed 2 things. One, that OIG won't be able to produce the report before October 29th, and by then the funding for the act would expire. Second, OIG has put out 2 RFPs since the sexual harassment legislation emergency was enacted over the summer. Both proposals were deemed non-responsive due to non-compliance with the district's subcontracting requirement. OIG is now seeking a waiver for the subcontracting requirement from DSLBD. Due to these obstacles, this emergency measure today addresses both issues. First, it changes the funding from FY 23 to 24 so that the OIG can dip into the current fiscal year funding. And second, it allows for the IG to produce a report of findings no later than 120 days after the award of a contract. With that, I move the emergency declaration resolution.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on PR 25-461. Madam Secretary?
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. And Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-519. Councilmember Nadeau.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion. By voice vote on the bill, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-443, Ward 8 Community Investment Fund Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Trahan White.
Thank you, Chairman. In this year's Local Budget Act, the Committee on Recreation, Libraries, and Youth Affairs transferred $528,000 to the Committee on Business and Economic Development for DSLBD's recurring grants to support Ward 8 Community Investment Fund to support minority businesses east of Anacostia River. This summer, DSLBD advised my staff and I that the funds were issued to the Ward 8 Community Investment Fund, which is not a legal entity, but the name of the actual grant. Instead, this program ran by the DC Community Development Consortium Institute. This is a technical change that has to be made in order for the money to get to the community. This measure corrects the name of the entity to receive the grants, DSLBD, and provides for the administration of the grant through eligibility and reporting requirements. I want to thank those who are at DSLBD for flagging this for us and helping us to serve and strengthen businesses here in Washington, DC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember White. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Madam Secretary, will you call the roll? The vote is on PR 25-443.
Councilmember Nadeau,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker,
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-497. Councilmember White,
So moved.
discussion. We'll have a voice vote on Bill 25-497. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Was a little anemic. We'll go to the noes. Are there any no votes? I don't hear any no votes. The bill's approved unanimously. Councilmember Fruman, you wanted to be recognized?
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. I would like to ask that CJCC Data Collection Technical Correction Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023 be taken off of the table.
It's a motion to remove from the table PR 25-466. I had tabled this at the beginning of our consideration of emergency bills because Councilmember Pinto was not present. I think we could do unanimous consent. If there's no objection, the motion to take from the table is approved. Hearing no objection.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Councilmember Pinto, I would like to present the declaration. On July 11th, 2023, the council passed the Prioritizing Public Safety Emergency Amendment Act of 2023, which included a provision requiring the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, CJCC, on a quarterly basis beginning on October 1, 2023, to collect and post data on processes and outcomes of different approaches in the criminal justice system, including on diversion and alternative dispositions and sentencing agreements. The intent of this provision was to improve public access to important data points about all aspects of the criminal justice system. Based on consultation with partner agencies in the criminal justice system, it would be helpful to clarify the language of this provision regarding which aspects of the criminal justice system the CJCC is required to collect and post data about. Emergency legislation is necessary to ensure that the CJCC has the direction and authority necessary to enable appropriate implementation of the data collection and posting prior to the CJCC's first posting of the data in October. I move the declaration.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes, and Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
The declaration is approved unanimously. The underlying bill, Bill 25-528, Councilmember Fruman.
I move on behalf of Councilmember Pinto, the underlying bill.
We have the bill before us. Is there discussion? By a voice vote, since the declaration was approved unanimously on Bill 25-528, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? I don't hear any no votes, so the bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is reading and vote on emergency legislation at the request of the mayor. Let our vows endure. Emergency Declaration Resolution 2023 PR 25-468. Councilmember Henderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to postpone this measure until the November 7th legislative meeting. Considering that Congress got its act together. For now,
Wait a minute, did you say Congress has its act together?
except for now.
I think that's debatable. I believe the Democrats said that their caucus that they're going to vote to vacate. So I'm not sure that Congress has its act together. But that's not the point. The motion is to postpone to November 7th. If there's no objection, it will be postponed. Hearing no objection. It is postponed. We have the temporary bills before us. I'm checking, I believe all the temporary bills listed on page 13 were approved with the exception of the last item. So if there's no objection, I will move in block consideration of, and I'm just going to give the short titles. CJCC data collection, technical correction, temporary. Medical cannabis patient access clarification, emergency, no, it should say temporary. That's Bill 25-515. 11th Street Bridge Project DOEE permit temporary, DC Nursing Education Enhancement Program temporary, parity and workers' compensation recovery temporary, clarification of UDC PR Harris exclusive use repeal temporary, which includes the DEMPED Grant Making Authority, Karen House TOPA exemption temporary, sexual harassment investigation review clarification temporary, and Ward 8 Community Investment Fund clarification temporary. Those measures are all before us with one vote. Madam Secretary, you don't get out of here without another roll call vote. There'll be a roll call vote on the 9 temporaries.
Councilmember Pinto is absent. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. And Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The temporary bills are in block are approved. The agenda says the next legislative meeting is October 17th, but as I have said repeatedly, don't count on this. The next legislative meeting is November 7th with the committee of the whole meeting on October 17th. There being no further business, the time is 1:30 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.